helpful to think about the economics of space AI from a cost and revenue perspective, like actually every other model. Instead of thinking too much about the opportunities of space and sort of call it virtual reality type environments, why don't we just look at the actual economics today and where we could go with space AI? And what we mean with that is things like the cost per exaflop. We can argue about the units of analysis, but what we're using here is an exaflop because according to our analysis, in today's world, you can, per ton of compute, roughly get 1 exaflop, which is a measure of compute. And a measure of compute then gives you roughly the opportunity to generate revenue from that exaflop through the tokens. So we go from power, we go from weight, so the weight of a piece of compute, to the power needed to actually do the compute, to the tokens produced while it's working, and then the tokens generate some revenue. Today we have something between $3 and $10 per million tokens of revenue. That's obviously going to go down, but we're using today's numbers just to get a sense. And if you run the model, I'm going to give a very broad overview here, and the numbers can change, but the idea is the following. If you run the model today, you realize that space AI can reduce costs per token by more than 100 times. Or another way to think about it is that at current revenue per token numbers, you could have a payback within days if you keep that price. Now, of course, that's not going to happen. What happens in compute, always happens in compute, is that you have lowering of price. So what we expect to happen based on the economics of bringing compute into orbit and pricing it accordingly, that we could have more than 100 times lower cost per token. In other words, intelligence is going to become a lot more accessible, a lot more cheap. I think that's fairly safe to say, because you don't just have the positive engineering and physics on your side for space AI, you also have the negative social political aspects on Earth, Nimby problems, geopolitical problems. If you just think about, if I gave you $1 billion now and you can go and build a data center anywhere in the world, just go where there's cheap energy and build that thing, and you will quickly realize that there's nowhere you can go. And in fact, the only places you can go and put billions of dollars into any kind of operation are places like the US. Honestly, I wouldn't know where else to go. And the reason for that is just political risk, right? You go to Europe, you're going to have environmental problems. Look at Tesla. They built a factory in Berlin. They're being harassed by left-wing fanatic union types. You can go to the UK. You can go to Scotland. Stranded energy. Let's talk about stranded energy. You could potentially go to New Zealand. Geothermal energy. But then New Zealand's government has shown during COVID times to be beyond crazy, and you can't trust these people. Okay, fine. How about we go to the Sahara? Why don't we just go there, build it? Forget it. Like, what, you want to be at the mercy of Libya or Chad or Egypt? Well, fine. How about Chile? Atacama Desert. Chile, as crazy as it gets when it comes to governments. They have, after Pinochet for a while, they had a few decades of outrunning their neighbors, but they're as crazy and screwed up as anybody else in Latin America. It is just what it is. So where can you go, right? Oceans, maybe, fine, but oceans are vulnerable, difficult, expensive, and if you go to the middle of the Pacific Ocean, might as well go to space. So my point here is that there really aren't that many places you can go. You can go to the US, though. I think what you need to do is go to, like any other investment, you're building billions of dollars of equipment. You have to check the geopolitical constituency. You have to make sure you can actually own what you own, all that kind of stuff. China is a different story. They own a big chunk of the globe. Russia, of course, has potential because they control a big piece of real estate, and they could potentially build out massive electricity infrastructure, which they're doing, particularly in China. So that's a competitor. We don't have that option. We can't just displace hundreds of thousands of people and build a dam and something like that. It's just not going to happen in the US. And I think it's okay that's not possible. And so that gets us to the point where if we want to increase the availability of compute by, let's say, 1,000x, we have to, of course, lower the price by at least maybe 500x. We can pay a bit more for intelligence, but I mean, per token, of course, it's going to be much cheaper. But overall, the budget can go up the same way we pay more for entertainment because we have a lot more options, and it's much more much better than maybe 50 years ago. But we pay less per unit of entertainment. We pay a lot less per unit of communication, but we pay more for communication. So the same thing is going to happen in intelligence. So we ran the model. We ran it through Grok. You're welcome to do your own models. I'm not going to get into the numbers here. This is not about whether we price $3 per token or $4 per token. When we talk hundreds of times lower prices, it's about physics and engineering, and that's where we are living today as far as an analysis is concerned. So when we look at physics and engineering, there's a couple of things we want to say. One is we have the ability to launch at much lower cost per kilogram. That's Starship. That's one option that we have, one vector that we obviously are working on with SpaceX. Then we have a big thing that I haven't heard people talk too much about it, which is currently the whole chip industry is obsessed with token per watt. And it's actually very interesting from the investor's perspective. When you look at changes, shifts in industry, that's when opportunity arises. And when industry optimizes from one place to another, that's when huge opportunities arise. I mean, we've had this in the past, for example, when the US oil and gas industry was focused on geopolitical, basically conquering places around the world to find oil and gas. And then that became the focus, right? So we built this huge army and defense budget and all that. And then when we got to the shale revolution, we shifted our focus because we weren't dependent anymore on all these Middle Eastern countries. And that's why now the Middle East is basically blowing up, because we don't really care anymore that much about them. You can go further back when we were optimizing for whatever, horses, and then when the car came, the whole industry, everything started changing. We started optimizing for very different things. So when you have these shifts in what we are optimizing for, because people in general, industries, are incredibly good at, once you get the ball rolling, once people know what they have to do, once engineers and business people have a line of sight of what needs to be done, they're very good at executing. What they're not very good at is finding new things to do and also pivoting. That's where entrepreneurs kick in. That's where Silicon Valley kicks in. That's where the biggest value is created, because there's, by definition, no competition for any kind of disruptive technology. There's no competition for optimizing. Currently, for example, if you're optimizing for, kilogram per token, if that's your goal, you're the only one who's doing that. I mean, there's a few startups doing that, but there's nobody really obsessively trying to reduce the weight per token, because that's not where it's at right now. Where it's at right now is power per token, dollar per token. Well, dollar per token is always going to be an optimization, but the point being is that you want to be, as an investor, you want to be positioned, of course, in the optimization value chain of the future. That's where the most value is concerned, and we're hopefully we're in that space. So back to our analysis. So like we said, we expect massively lower cost per token. In other words, massively lower cost for intelligence, and that will yield opportunities along the lines of robots, humanoid robots, and scientific discovery. The demand for intelligence, like we said many times on this podcast, is infinite, and that's something. It's not the topic of this particular episode. Just to remind people, the reason we believe that is because we follow, Popperian epistemology and David Deutsch's sort of more modern version of Karl Popper. Any kind of problem requires knowledge, and new knowledge creates new problems, and new knowledge as defined, now this is us, we define new knowledge as knowledge that can be monetized, that's useful for humans, and that kind of knowledge will proliferate and it will grow. For example, I mean, this is a perfect example. We have a bottleneck. We don't have the ability to produce 5x our power production in the US in the next 5 years. We just can't do that. The Nimby and political problems are too high. So we find new ways to do this. This is new knowledge, new intelligence, new tokens need to be produced to produce that. We need to find engineering solutions for bringing this stuff up there in orbit. We need to find engineering solutions to run it in orbit, engineering solutions to bring the intelligence back down to Earth, engineering solutions to actually use the intelligence with Optimus and Robotaxi and many other things. So therefore, intelligence has infinite demand, and with massively lower cost of intelligence, we will see a huge boost in GDP. And this is roughly also what Musk has been talking about. This is what I think the industry is not ready yet to grasp. But for us here at Orange Capital Partners, this is very important, not just because we're invested in Tesla and NVIDIA, but also, of course, this is where we're going to be looking for new investments. The purpose of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices, and this is the mother of all fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices, which is AI data centers in space. There's plenty of new concepts and engineering practices. We're not even talking about the business models downstream and all the opportunities that come with all this new intelligence and the lower cost of intelligence, lower cost of communication, lower cost of transport, which will change our terrestrial existence. We spoke about this in the robotaxi context. If we have robotaxis going around for 20 cents per mile, that's 5 to 10x lower than today, depending on how you look at it. More than 10x if you add the chauffeuring. So if you really don't want to drive anymore, which I think most people are okay with, then we're talking at least 10x lower cost for transportation. In terms of communication, we can lower the cost of communication by another, also at least 10x, if not more, just replacing the telco network with Starlink type technologies, and also bringing more new intelligence into the network. So our terrestrial life will change, but this is of course opening huge new opportunities. So I guess what we're trying to get across in this episode is really two things. One is the space AI data centers will dramatically lower the cost of intelligence, and that is a huge boon for industry. And second, we will also look at actually there's three things. Maybe the second thing is as far as chip investment and high tech investment are concerned, we're going to shift our focus away from optimizing for power and towards optimizing for weight. And then the third is all the opportunities that are adjacent to that in terms of terrestrial applications of intelligence, robotaxi being the first one, but there's plenty more because we like these types of markets where we think demand is always growing, maybe not infinite, but definitely always growing with lower prices. One is intelligence is one of them. Transportation and communications are others. People will always ask for more of it, and with lower prices, they will increase their demand. So we like those types of markets, and we like the industries that supply them. And with this lower cost of intelligence, we have a new source of call it. It's the equivalent of finding new sources of energy. Which is really what we're doing, right? We're transforming solar power into compute, into
actual applications on Earth through more intelligence, and that is a huge opportunity. And I think for listeners to this podcast, we've been talking about disruptive technologies and opportunities, and the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. Well, this is how it feels like to run a hedge fund. When you are at the brink of this huge opportunity where you can literally generate a lot of wealth, but it's not just about the wealth. It's exciting. It's just really exciting. Young people can go study, engineering, physics, finding new ways to solve these problems. Business people can solve the problems on the business side. So there's so many new opportunities. And I think that's what life is all about. Thank you.